Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and I was born to love you. I was born to lick your face. I was born to rub you, but you were born to rub me first.
Wow. That is something. I don't even know how to respond to that, really.
I always know you like my musical interludes.
Yeah, you know, your singing is only rivaled by I don't even know. I don't even know.
When we record these, we record it, we're on a Zoom like application here on the computer. So I get to see Josh's face when I do this, and it's worth it for that. And Josh, as you know, this movie that we're covering was filled with improvisation, and this scene was an improvised song by Chevy Chase. So we're giving a little love to the format here.
Yeah, and this whole podcast is improvised, so it really is relevant. So what movie is that we're talking about? Well, in this season of Awesome Movie Year, we've been talking about the films of 1980, and this episode is our pick for a notable feature debut from a filmmaker, and that filmmaker is Harold Ramis, and the film is Caddyshack, which is not only Harold Ramis's first film as a director, but one of the most popular and successful films of 1980, and one of probably the most influential comedy films, at least of the decade, so which we'll, I'm sure, talk about later.
And this could have been a cult classic for us this season as well. I mean, obviously, it was a hit, but it grew in status so much over the decade, as you mentioned, whether it was cable or home video rental, that it just kind of became a much bigger hit as more people had access to it.
Yeah, it did. I don't know if a cult classic is the right way to describe it, because like you said, it was a big hit out of the gate and just became a bigger hit. But certainly it has its dedicated following that has grown over time. But it was a big success right away, grossing $60 million worldwide on its budget of $4.8 million. And building off of the comedy careers of Harold Ramis and the stars Bill Murray and Chevy Chase and Rodney Dangerfield, but especially Ramis and Murray and Chase. Bill Murray and Chevy Chase, of course, have their history on Saturday Night Live. There was Stripes before this, I believe, right? Was earlier than this with Bill Murray that Harold Ramis worked on as a writer. And Harold Ramis also worked on, as a writer on Animal House. So a lot of comedy pedigree coming into this movie that people were excited to see the next work from these people.
And I think you left out the most influential one in this, which was Doug Kenny, the writer and co-creator of the National Lampoon magazine and, the Animal House co-writer as well. Like, this is all stemming from that National Lampoon brand of humor.
Yeah, there's definitely a very National Lampoon-y vibe, even though this isn't officially a National Lampoon film. So it was a big hit with audiences, critics less so.
No. Josh, real fast, Stripes was 1981, the year after this.
Okay, so maybe was it Meatballs that Murray and Ramis worked on before this?
Yeah, Meatballs and Animal House both came before this.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. So that sort of momentum from these comedy hits, whether it's Meatballs, Animal House, Saturday Night Live, or just National Lampoon in general, that these guys had all been working on. And critics very familiar with all of those and comparing this film to those other films. But Roger Ebert was mixed-ish. A lot of these reviews kind of acknowledge a bit of the comedy, but overall are not super positive. Roger Ebert said, "Caddyshack never finds a consistent comic note of its own, but it plays host to all sorts of approaches from its stars, who sometimes hardly seem to be occupying the same movie. There's Bill Murray's self-absorbed craziness, Chevy Chase's laid-back bemusement, and Ted Knight's apoplectic overplaying. And then there is Rodney Dangerfield, who wades into the movie and cleans up. Maybe one of the movie's problems is that the central characters are never really involved in the same action. Murray's off on his own fighting gophers. Dangerfield arrives, devastates, exits. Knight is busy impressing the caddies, making vague promises about scholarships and launching boats. If they were somehow all drawn together into the same story, maybe we'd be carried along more confidently. And I think to me, too, that was one of the things that struck me is this movie essentially doesn't really have a plot. It's just a bunch of little comedic bits, a lot of which are funny, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of structure to it.
Well, Josh, to have a structure, you might have to have a completed script that people are going from. And while there was a script, it seemed like, I mean, look, we know like these are huge. I don't know if you had mentioned Second City, but a lot of these guys came from Second City in Chicago. And, improv was not, it's not just a game to them, it's a form on how to build and create and get to the heart of comedy, right? So, a lot of the script was either thrown out or rewritten or just ignored, right? So what you get is a mishmash. And I think if you don't go with the ride, then you're going to be out from the moment that you start this thing.
Right. And I think, I did have a lot of fun with most of those aspects. And this is the kind of movie that I tend not to like. I mean, we've talked about in multiple episodes, especially Dave is often picking these kind of lowbrow comedies as his pick, and I don't respond to them. So I was unsure of how I would feel about this film. But I think probably because a lot of that is improv and these guys who are very talented to get to kind of go off on their own little riffs that are a lot of fun, I enjoyed that. But it was definitely a movie that, at a certain point, I realized like, okay, there really just isn't a story of any kind to follow here. And obviously that's not really what they're aiming for.
So I read Caddyshack, The Making of a Hollywood Cinderella Story by Chris Nashawati, the book on Caddyshack. And Josh and I, Dave, and you did too. You watched Caddyshack too also, right? I think that would be a more interesting book because it's such a horrible thing. But anyway, the whole thing is Caddyshack. Originally, the story was supposed to be about Danny Noonan and those caddies and their relationships and rivalries and the scholarship and all that stuff because Brian Doyle Murray, the other writer on this, grew up as a caddy, and so did Ramis and Bill Murray in Illinois. And then when they started watching the dailies, as you mentioned, you got Bill Murray, you got Chevy Chase, Rodney Dangerfield really was a huge breakout star here. Ted Knight obviously playing the heavy, so they're like, no, we're going the complete opposite way. We're going to just focus on the funny, and wherever the story falls, the story falls.
Yeah, and that is a weird tension where, especially coming to this, like I had not ever seen it before, and the reputation is, oh, this is a crazy comedy with Bill Murray and Chevy Chase and Rodney Dangerfield, and it is, but the way that it focuses on those caddy characters, and especially Danny Noonan, the character played by Michael O'Keefe, it's
Noonan.
It was a surprise to me that like, oh, this sort of boring teenager is really actually the main character of the movie. Is a little strange. But that process absolutely makes sense that they would see those other guys as more entertaining to focus on. So Vincent Canby in the New York Times, also mildly complimentary in a backhanded way. He said, Caddyshack, the newest Animal House spinoff, is this summer's Meatballs, a movie that tears the lid off the apparently placid life at a waspy country club to expose bigotry, ignorance, lust, and a common tendency to cheat on the golf course. Caddyshack is a pleasantly loose-limbed sort of movie with some comic moments, most of them belonging to Mr. Dangerfield, who predates Animal House by a number of years. It's not as funny as Cheech and Chong's next movie, but it is less pushy than Meatballs. It is not as thickly stocked with outrageous moments as Animal House, yet it is far easier to take than Where the Buffalo Roam. So that's sort of his summary of the state of comedy at that moment, I guess.
Don't even know if Where the Buffalo Roam was a comedy. That's Bill Murray playing Hunter S. Thompson in an effort that did not go so well from what everyone says.
Yeah, I haven't seen that movie. And I think you're right that there may be less of a comedy, but maybe just because it was a Bill Murray vehicle that was out around this time, he decided to cite it. Maybe Vincent Canby, not the world's foremost expert on lowbrow comedy, would just be my guess.
He's not really sitting, not doing casting calls with Lorne Michaels to get the new SNL Not Ready for Primetime Players.
Probably not, but he's willing to give Caddyshack a little credit. And I think that loose-limbed characterization that he has for it is similar to what we're talking about, that it's just kind of, with all the improv, and it's kind of episodic, and here's some little bits that are just strewn together, and that's the end result.
Yeah, I think what happens is that, we've mentioned like Super Troopers on this show, which is clearly takes a lot from like Caddyshack, right? And Dave and I like it and you don't, and that's fair. If the bits work for you, then you just are like, cool, this is fun. But if not, then it's just, there's really nothing there for you, because what else can you go with?
Right. There's not a lot of narrative through line to focus on. There isn't a lot of character development or emotional involvement or anything to bolster the comedy. Either the jokes, like you say, either the jokes work for you, you find them funny, or you don't, and then you're going to have a rough time with this. And I did find a lot of them funny.
So. Yeah, you don't have to defend yourself. You twice have told us now.
I feel like because we had so many of these kinds of episodes where I feel the opposite. I want to make it clear that I'm no Vincent Canby. Yeah.
No, you're not. No.
Thank you.
You're no Bosley Crowther either.
Yeah, I don't know if Bosley Crowther ever saw this film. So on the extreme negative end, Arthur Knight in The Hollywood Reporter said, "To attempt a critical evaluation of Caddyshack is a little like describing the aesthetic qualities of an outhouse. Its jokes are almost entirely scatological, deriving from such socially questionable practices as farting, vomiting, and nose picking. In one protracted sequence, a chocolate candy bar afloat in a swimming pool is mistaken for a turd, causing the pool to empty in a Jaws parody. It closes with Bill Murray finding the bar and biting into it, causing a nearby matron to faint dead away. Quiet good taste, that's what I like. Having established the level of humor in the screenplay, I can only add that its large and manic cast, drawn mainly from television, sustains that level with a chilling persistence, while Johnny Mandel's score seems intent on burying everything beneath its deafening roar." Dave, you're the score expert. Did you find this score unpleasant?
I didn't notice that at all, but I did think it was funny to point out that they're all from TV when these are some of like the biggest movie stars, like after this point.
It was a good dig. It was like what a dig, right?
Yeah.
Right. Only successful on television.
I mean, I think especially at this time, we don't see this now, but the TV was certainly regarded as like a much lower art form for a long period of time. So that is considered a dig.
Josh, how do you feel about vomiting as a social practice? It's not really like something people just go out and attempt to do in most places,
No, I mean, I think vomiting is sort of involuntary usually, but I don't know. It's weird because the way he describes this is kind of what I expected. I thought, oh, this is going to be a bunch of vulgar bodily function humor that I'm not going to like. And the scene that he describes there in detail with the candy bar in the pool that everyone thinks is a turd, I didn't think was particularly funny. But I feel like a lot of the humor in this movie is wittier than just the vulgarity that he describes. And there's a lot of cleverness, especially I think in the improv from Bill Murray and Chevy Chase, that's about wordplay or just weird anecdotes and stuff that's far more clever than what he gives it credit for.
Yeah, when we first meet Bill Murray, Carl Spangler.
Spackler, I think.
Spackler. Right? That's what I said. It's a new microphone that changes syllables for me. It's Carl Spackler.
Egon Spengler is the character from Ghostbusters.
There you go.
Harold Ramis.
Yeah, there you go. So, I think the first time we meet him, he's telling the story about when he was caddying for the Dalai Lama, right? And that's a great monologue where, he doesn't, "Hey, Lama, you're not going to give me anything for my efforts?" And he's like, "When you die on your deathbed, you'll have total spiritual enlightenment," or whatever he says. And he goes, "So I got that going for me," right? Just fun stuff like that, which is smart and just like a little underplayed as opposed to like the turd scene, which I'm, got a huge reaction when it was in the theater.
I'm sure it would have. I mean, it's the kind of thing that is very broad, but I love the underplaying, both Bill Murray and Chevy Chase, the way that they almost toss off these punchlines like you barely even notice them, and it makes them even funnier.
I agree with you, and I think this is some of the best that Chevy Chase does of it, because like when we watch Caddyshack 2, he's almost like he's gone a level below it where it's like, now you're not even trying, right? He's trying just enough here to make it be like, oh, that's so natural. Like where he's like, yeah, you're not good at golf at all, right? And then he'll just like walk away where you think he's going to be like, yeah, you can do better or whatever. But he goes the opposite way with the punchline. And yeah, I think he's very funny in this as well.
He really is. He really is. So, Jason, this seems like a movie that you probably had seen when you were younger and appreciated.
Yeah, it's fun. It's just a fun movie, you know. Good rainy day, hour and a half. I don't know the first time I saw it, but it's always enjoyable.
Yeah. Dave, this obviously seems like your kind of movie as well. Did you watch this as a kid?
Funny enough, this was one that I only ever watched once, I think, as a kid. And I don't remember liking it that much. Like, I remember it was like the one of those early 80s comedies that everybody like has growing up, everybody of our age, you know, and I just didn't connect with it. Maybe it was the golf part. I don't know. But I really liked it this time around, though.
Your parents didn't make you rewatch the nude scene over and over when you were in elementary school?
I probably watched that scene a couple of times.
That was middle school.
Right. Yeah, and of course, I had never seen this. I don't remember if friends of mine, you know, were into it when I was a kid, because I did see a bunch of these 80s kind of lowbrow comedies when I was younger, but for whatever reason, never had gotten to Caddyshack. So, and that's why I think coming to it now, I thought, oh, this is the moment for me to even kind of like this has probably passed. But I was pleasantly surprised. I enjoyed it. So
hooray.
Hooray, yes. So Jason, you as you said, you read the whole book on the making of Caddyshack. So any other insights on the background?
Let's start with chapter 1. No. Hey,
this
Josh,
podcast is now an audiobook.
Yeah.
You know what's so fun is I have to say, Josh, because we've talked about him before and he's crazy and we've ripped him for his, you know, not his best ideas. But John Peters, who produced this, was essential to making this a hit. When they were in the editing room trying to put it together, he was the one who suggested the gopher. So, you know, which, as we know, he suggests giant robot spiders and all these crazy things. So they might have had the gopher like as a little bit like just thing, but they didn't actually have the animatronic gopher or the thing tying it together. And he was the one who suggested, what if the gopher is the through line? And he also did like a lot of things where he would protect the crew from like Mike Medavoy, who was the executive, or like the country club when they didn't want like the course blown up. He would like take them on like riverboat cruises. And so they would blow up the course while all the rich patrons weren't there. So it was kind of fun, as crazy as we know that he is, to read about the good things that John Peters did. Of course, he also did bad things on this film. Like we just mentioned that nude scene with Cindy Morgan playing Lacey Underall. When they were shooting that, Peters sent a Playboy photographer to the set and he was going to shoot stills of it and just put her in the magazine. And she said, no, I don't agree to that. I agree to do this for the movie because it makes sense in the movie, but I didn't agree to that. That's just exploiting me. And John Peters said, you're not invited to the premiere anymore. So he uninvited her to the premiere, and another cast member ended up taking her, and she just looked at him and said, surprised to see you here, which was a good riff. He is both an awful dick, but it was fun to at least read that he did some good things, I'd say.
Yeah, interesting Hollywood figure there, John Peters, who we talked about in our episode on Wild Wild West, and of course, memorably played by Bradley Cooper in Licorice Pizza.
And Warren Beatty in Shampoo, supposedly.
Yeah. That's it's an interesting dichotomy that all of that probably comes from his boundless self-confidence, and some of it is towards making the movie better and some of it not so much. But yeah, it was funny to see his name. I hadn't realized he was one of the producers or maybe the main producer here, and seeing his name in the opening credits there.
Yeah, in the book, they go into detail about like Animal House is such a success and like everyone wants these guys, right? And Peters had like a young exec at an Animal House screening and he got like Ramis and Kenny to come in. He's like, we'll make a movie with you. And everyone was like, what? How did John Peters get those two before anyone else, you know?
Yeah, he had that magic in Hollywood, at least for a little while. So we will come back then in a moment and talk about our general thoughts on Caddyshack. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1980, we are talking about our notable feature debut, Caddyshack, from Harold Ramis. And I feel like I've just been, repeating myself that I was pleasantly surprised with this film and found it amusing when I often don't like this kind of movie. So I'll just say that again. That is how I felt. But
Good.
Jason, what's your favorite thing about Caddyshack?
I think we mentioned it. It's, I mean, look, it's interesting to me that like this was the one that like made Rodney Dangerfield transition from stand up to film, like as a film star. I really like Ted Knight as like the opposite, right? Like he's that old school actor who obviously did not party with these guys into the wee hours of the night, but he really, goes all in on the like if you're the injustices that these people are doing to him. So the 4 stars really do hold up. We've already mentioned Murray and Chase, and so I mean I do think that's what holds this whole movie together.
Yeah, and Ted Knight really has kind of a thankless role because while Bill Murray and Chevy Chase and Rodney Dangerfield get to kind of riff and be funny, and they know that if the movie works, the audience is going to be laughing with them and enjoy them. And Ted Knight has to come in and be, as was it Ebert, whoever described him as apoplectic, and just be the guy who shuts it all down. And he doesn't get to have his own funny bits per se. So, but he commits to it, like you're saying.
That's what is so funny about it.
Right. And he makes it funny by not trying to be funny, by just playing that role straight. So I think that is a tougher thing to do. But I will say, as much as I enjoyed Bill Murray and Chevy Chase in this movie and their improvisations, which I think are some of the funniest bits, I kind of felt the opposite about Rodney Dangerfield, where he's coming in and obviously he's also improvising, but it feels like he's just doing his stand-up. Like he just walks in the country club and starts doing a Rodney Dangerfield routine. And I guess I don't find him all that funny. And it also just didn't seem like it fit as well as those other improvs that Chase and Murray do.
I thought you would not be a fan of that. I mean,
that tracks.
Yeah. He's a big personality, and there are those rich guys who are rough around the edges, and I mean that's what he is. But they cast him because they wanted him to play Rodney Dangerfield, right? So,
sure.
You wonder around this time, like he was on that like run where he was just killing on the Tonight Show all the time, and he was a unique personality, and they thought they had a vehicle that can serve it, and obviously it worked. But I get it,
Josh. Obviously, you don't like him as much as Bill Murray and Chevy Chase in this, but do you like him more than Jackie Mason in the sequel?
Well, yeah, maybe we'll talk more about the sequel in a little bit. But yes, Jackie Mason is much worse. And obviously it was cast to replace Rodney Dangerfield in the sequel.
The problem, Josh, is with Rodney Dangerfield, you give him... What is it that I'm looking for? He can't get any respect from you.
That is exactly the case. Yes, I don't give him that. So, but no, I mean, obviously, Jason, you're right that he's doing exactly what they want him to do. They want him to come in and do Rodney Dangerfield, and he does. He delivers exactly what he's supposed to deliver. I just felt like, and I don't know if this is literally stuff from his stand-up routine or it just feels like it is, but to me, whereas with those other Bill Murray and Chevy Chase bits, it feels like them riffing off of Caddyshack, off of what might have been in the script or what is the story.
Understood.
This doesn't feel like that at all.
Yeah, well, that has to be part, Harold Ramis is directing it, so he's giving him like the kind of imperative of the scene. So, but I think that goes to like the bigger point, which is like the movie opens and it's got a funny scene at the Noonan household, and you see like there's 12 kids and like 1 or 2 bathrooms, and it's funny, and then you're like, oh, I guess we're never going to see them ever again, right? And it's like the dad's funny. There was a lot there that could have been a thing, but again, structurally, it's not much for structure. So
yeah,
it
so really isn't.
That's where we're going, right? We're on this high wire, and sometimes we fall off and or fall down, but we seem to make it across to the end.
Yeah, that scene though does really stick out because we spend so much time, and it's kind of jarring at first, or at least again, for me, because of maybe what I expected out of this movie. I was like, who are these people? Where are we? What is happening here?
Well, the first 10 minutes is that, and then Lou Loomis, played by Brian Doyle Murray, talking to the caddies. So you think it's going to be a movie about the caddies.
Right. And there's the other caddy that Danny Noonan has kind of like a rivalry with, and they have a fight, and he's got like
That
his
goes
brother.
nowhere.
Right.
Yeah.
None of that goes anywhere. And I mean, Danny at least continues to show up throughout the movie. He's the caddy for Chevy Chase's character, and he's trying to get his scholarship. So he's got to impress the judge, the Ted Knight character. So he's at least still there, even though sometimes it feels like the movie has forgotten about him. But any of those longer subplots, you're right. We never see his family again. We really don't see very much of those other caddies. Brian Doyle Murray as the caddy's boss kind of shows up here and there.
That's a smaller, kind of side character.
Right. And I'm sure because, he's the co-writer, he gets a little part for himself. But I mean, there's also a subplot about Danny's girlfriend maybe being pregnant, and possibly they're going to
It doesn't work.
Talk about her having an abortion, or suddenly it gets weirdly serious. And then it almost feels like they were like, oops, because then like 3 scenes later, she just shows up and she says, oh, you know what? I'm not pregnant. Never mind. Forget that whole plot.
That's Sarah Holcomb, who I think this was maybe her last movie.
Yeah.
Having to play the Irish. She was dating Brian Doyle Murray at the time, and she was originally going to play Lacey Underall. But I think Cindy Morgan is that bombshell type that you want to play that. And instead, Sarah Holcomb requested to play Maggie O'Houlihan, and that was not a good really decision. I think she's a weak link in this film.
Yeah, she's really bad, and her accent is so terrible. Like, at first I thought, is she supposed to be like Eastern European or something? And then I guess she's supposed to be Irish, but then sometimes she just sounds American, and they should have just not. I don't know why they wanted her to have an accent in the first place.
If we lose that character, do we lose anything from the movie, really?
No. And honestly, most of the interactions with that character just make Danny look bad, because he's kind of treating her very dismissively while in the meantime sort of attempting to get with Lacey Underall, who's obviously not, she's interested in Chevy Chase, but it just does. Yeah. Nothing about that character works. None of those storylines work. It could have just been completely got.
Josh, Lacey Underall is a very liberated, sexually, powerful woman. She kind of gets what she wants in this movie at all times, huh?
Yeah, no, good for her. But I'm saying that in relation to her, Danny looks bad because he's got this girlfriend who's clearly like his actual girlfriend. They've been together, and he's just kind of blowing her off half the time to go try to get with Lacey Underall.
I mean, there is a line where she says, "How do you even know the baby's yours, Danny?" Right?
I think that was better than her accent.
So you don't know. Maybe they're just, like the set itself, maybe there's an era of promiscuity and liberation going on there.
I mean, if that's what it's meant to be, I think they really fail to pull that off.
I think what's interesting though is like, we know there are things that don't work, but these are not things that anyone remembers from the movie. You say the name Noonan and, you think of Noonan, and I'm like, it's all the golf jokes and the clubhouse banter and that scene with Bill Murray and Chevy Chase, which was not in the script, where, he's playing through Carl Spackler's weed grass and everything like that. So.
Right. And that's true. But I think on the other hand, like I said, again, just knowing this from kind of pop culture, I expected all that stuff that you were just describing, and then was surprised that there was so much other stuff in the movie. Like, they do spend a lot of time. Like, if you watch this movie, you have to sit through Danny and his girlfriend and the caddies in the shack and the fight between Danny and the other caddy. It's all there. So I feel like they could have gone one step further and just gotten rid of all of it. And maybe that would have been a funnier film, although it would have had even less of a plot.
Yeah, I don't even know if that would work as a narrative, but hey, who knows?
Jason, you read that book. Did they talk at all about trying to find a balance between like the original script idea and just being a joke delivery system?
I mean, basically, they got into the editing room. They stalled as long as they could. Nobody could get this thing to work. And then, like I said, John Peters came up with that like through line, which is really just a bumper to move from segment to segment when there's nothing else to do. Right. So, obviously they all agreed like, hey, these are the funniest people. We're going to focus on them. And that's kind of how it went.
Yeah. I mean, and if it's that at that point, when you're in the editing room, you can't go back and shoot more scenes. because you would certainly have needed more. You would have needed more of Chase and Murray and Dangerfield in order to make this movie work entirely without the caddy characters.
They did shoot all that animatronic gopher stuff, though. That's from John Dykstra, his shop. But Dykstra won 3 Oscars, Star Wars, all this, and all that stuff is shot afterwards. Like, I think.
Okay,
yeah. But that's all on like a California. Like, they literally built the tunnels for this gopher to run through and everything like that. So, and maybe like they were able to get Bill Murray to come out for another day or two, which seemed to happen a lot. Like, he was scheduled there for 6 days, and then they're like, "Hey, Bill Murray's really funny. Let's fly him back next week." And they had to get like Lord Michael's permission and everything.
Yeah. So maybe there isn't the possibility of restructuring the movie like that.
Josh, we're talking about some of these like minor characters that don't work, but like, how about like the Bishop character? That's hilarious, where, he's a good man of faith and he's playing now the best round of his life in the rain and everything, he's just going for it. And then the lightning strikes and he has to call the round off, and then he becomes a drunk who doesn't believe in God anymore. I think that's a really funny commentary on how important golf is to this guy.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly funny bits around the margins of this movie in various ways, but the bits are what make the movie, and sometimes it gets away from them a little too much. But I agree. I laughed at a lot of the little stuff, and the gopher is fine. I mean, the gopher is completely ridiculous, but I think, and especially compared to Caddyshack 2, this movie has just the right amount of gopher where you're amused by it, but it doesn't become like a cartoon at any point. And it's really about Bill Murray's obsession with getting the gopher. And it's funny. But seeing the gopher dance, that's amusing. I laughed at it. It's dumb, but funny.
Dave, Kenny Loggins, huge soundtrack machine of the 80s. This was probably the one that broke him out, right? I'm All Right.
I would think so. Yeah. It's got to be. If not this one, it was right around this time with one of those other. He was so huge in that moment. Yeah,
it's like an extremely catchy song. It is very. It's a good way to bring you into the movie.
In the book, he said he watched a rough cut and like knew the song like almost right away and like went to his kitchen and wrote it in like 2 hours or something.
Sounds about right.
He's a machine, that Kenny.
Yeah, he really is. I mean, like when you think of 80s soundtracks, we've talked about like, Harold Faltermeyer and everything like that. Kenny Loggins is right there, right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's about, I mean, he doesn't write the scores, but those songs that, he can get so many of these pop hits from a variety of kinds of movies too. And he can go in his kitchen for 2 hours and write a song that's perfect for different kinds of movies.
I'm All Right peaked at number 7, Josh, on the Billboard chart.
I'm surprised it wasn't higher. It's I bet he still plays it in concert all the time.
Don't nobody worry about him.
So anything else we want to talk about with this film?
I want to, we mentioned Ted Knight. How about his little speech to christen the flying wasp, his boat, and just how sincere he is with that poem that he reads that is like, it somewhat makes sense, somewhat nonsensical, but totally off brand. Like, it's just so far removed from the reality of humanity. And he's just kind of wonderful with that.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to what we're saying, is that he commits to the role of this pompous idiot, and he doesn't get to make weird jokes like the rest of the cast does, but he fits perfectly in there. And it's funnier when Rodney Dangerfield comes in and destroys his boat, because he's been so serious and he's been so convincing as the guy who is so tied up in the having a boat or whatever. It makes it funnier when the wrecking ball of Rodney Dangerfield comedically and literally comes in and destroys it. So yeah, credit to him. Should we give Caddyshack a rating out of 5 gophers?
Sure, 5 dancing gophers. It gets 3 dancing gophers from the sky.
And you're dancing. I'm actually going to agree with you. I also will give it 3 dancing gophers. Amusing, fun. I liked it. Dave?
I'm going 3.5.
Right.
I liked it a little more than you guys.
Yeah. I feel like this is the kind of movie that, Dave, if you came in and you gave it a 5, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool, Josh. Let's come back and talk about the legacy of Caddyshack.
Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1980, we've been talking about the first feature from Harold Ramis, Caddyshack. And I mean, given that, maybe the first thing we should talk about with the legacy is Harold Ramis himself, who, even prior to directing this film, had established himself as a major comedy writer in Hollywood, as we said, Animal House and Meatballs, and continued on both as a director and a writer for a lot of really big mainstream comedy hits. I mean, he worked with Chevy Chase again on the first Vacation movie, working with Bill Murray on Groundhog Day, both of those as a director. He was the writer on Ghostbusters, as we've talked about in our 1984 season, as well as a co-star in that, and just had hit after hit through the 80s and 90s, some of which are not as good. Analyze This and Analyze That.
Analyze This was a big hit, though.
Right. No, it was a big hit. Well, maybe it wasn't a great movie, but it was certainly
I
a
like
big
that
hit.
one. I mean,
fun.
the sequels, whatever, but I like that one.
Yeah.
And then the other one that we should mention is Back to School, which he wrote for Rodney Dangerfield.
He did. And of course, slightly less notably for Rodney Dangerfield, he worked as a writer on Rover Dangerfield, the animated movie starring Rodney Dangerfield as the voice of a dog who looks like Rodney Dangerfield.
I'm a dog and I get no respect.
I'm pretty sure that's literally a line in the film.
Throw me a bone here, huh?
If we ever did 86, Back to School would probably be my pick, by the way. So
Back to School, Easy Money. Rodney Dangerfield had some really fun movies in the 80s.
I've never seen Back to School, and I don't know if I've seen anything else with him really. But I feel like the thing about Rodney Dangerfield is that he's just like he is here in Caddyshack. He's always just playing Rodney Dangerfield, the stand-up, you know.
Except in what is it, Natural Born Killers? Didn't he play like a heavy?
Oh yeah.
The father in a very serious role there.
Yeah, totally against type.
So Josh, back to Harold Ramis. Yeah, big acting star as well. You had mentioned Stripes, Ghostbusters, Knocked Up. You know, and the one other thing I wanted to say, he won a BAFTA for Best Original Screenplay for Groundhog Day, which is my favorite of his movies and one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh yeah, Groundhog Day
definitely.
is great. Yes.
So that was for screenplay. There's a Harold Ramis Film School at Second City, I think in Chicago, and it's the only film school dedicated specifically to comedy movies.
Yeah, I mean,
film.
When you
the
think
art of comedy on film.
When you think of
film and
comedy directors, I mean, Harold Ramis is right up there. I think he directed 10 or 11 films, so it's not a huge filmography, but the majority of them big comedy hits, including multiple classics. Sadly ended his film career on Year One in 2009, which is not a good movie. Although he also directed a few episodes of The Office, including after Year One came out. So I think that might have been the last things that he worked on as a director. And even more sadly, recently, as we weirdly talked about in our Shawshank Redemption episode, Ghostbusters Afterlife, featuring the digital recreation of the late Harold Ramis, played via motion capture by Bob Gunton of the Shawshank Redemption. So kind of ignominious there.
Again, I suggest they should have used Dave's hair for that, but
yeah.
Anyway, you mentioned Rodney Dangerfield, Josh. Look, legendary stand-up comedian, not just for himself, but the young comedian specials. He had that Club Dangerfield. I mean, you know, as a comedian that like Sam Kinison broke because of the young comedian special. Louis Anderson, Rita Rudner, Bob Saget, Yakov Smirnoff. He really paved the way for a lot of comedians to get to the next level.
Yeah, and I think his legacy is more as a comedian than as an actor, you know, even in some of those movies that were comedy classics, I guess, but it's really just an outgrowth of the stand-up stuff that he did.
Yeah, but what a wonderful thing. Like, can you think, like, who would it be today? Like, what if Ron White had 3 big movie hits right now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's more like Larry the Cable Guy or something who does
tried.
movies where he just is Larry the Cable Guy. And
Okay, but no one would ever say Larry the Cable Guy was. I mean, Cars was a big success, but you don't look back and be like, you could say he's had 2 to 3 comedy classics with Rodney Dangerfield. You can't say that about Larry the Cable Guy.
no,
Sorry,
and
fans of Operation Delta Force.
thank you. Delta Farce, man. Come
There
on.
you
Yeah,
go.
Get it
yeah.
right.
There you go.
But I think you're right that there are a lot of comedians like that essentially can't escape their stage personas or don't want to escape their stage personas and just want to put it into a movie. And it usually doesn't work. Or we could talk about Carrot Top, chairman of the board. Right. Stuff like that. And it usually doesn't work. So I guess give credit to Rodney Dangerfield for that. Of course, Chevy Chase and Bill Murray both became two of the biggest movie stars of the 1980s in comedies. And continue to be comedy legends. Chevy Chase has this reputation as being sort of difficult to work with, but at the same time, he's consistently making enjoyable films. I mean, he went on from this to work with Harold Ramis on Vacation and then make multiple movies in that Vacation franchise. He had the Fletch movies in the 80s, something like Three Amigos. And even later on, I mean, he was very entertaining on Community, although he left it after clashing with a lot of the people working on it, or even something like Hot Tub Time Machine, which I think is kind of underrated.
Dirty Work is great. We just kind of, when you think of chairman of the board, you think of Norm Macdonald there too. But because of the bit on Conan, you know what I'm talking about, Josh.
Yes, I do.
Chairman of the board, only if it's spelled Bored. That's classic. But I was thinking of Hot Tub Time Machine too, because I think that's the last great thing I remember him in, where he's like doing just fun Chevy Chase stuff. And I mean, look, we know the deal with Chevy Chase, right? You wish that he would just get like one home run out there one more time, but it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Yeah.
And he's very much satisfied with himself. And that can be good in terms of his confidence, but it seems also like he's never willing to make any changes to make himself easier to work with. And as time goes on,
it's a bummer.
It makes it tougher for him to find projects that are good where people want to work with him.
Well, and like you said, in Community, it was like this big feel-good comeback, and like people really loved him, and he just Chevy chased himself out of it, right?
He did. I mean, he increasingly made himself difficult, and eventually it was like, well, he's out, and the show went on without him and was still enjoyable, and he lost out on that.
Yeah.
So
a few other things, Josh, I'll roll through for you.
Yeah.
Michael O'Keefe had a Best Supporting Actor nod for The Great Santini, which is an awesome movie. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
No.
Definitely recommend it. He's a working actor still, and he was in Ironweed, which we mentioned not too long ago.
Yeah, Michael O'Keefe works constantly in TV, and I always remember him from his time on Roseanne as Jackie's boyfriend, Fred.
The wife-beating guy, right? Didn't he beat her up?
Oh, geez, maybe he did. Yeah, there were a lot of incongruously serious issues on Roseanne.
Ted Knight, a legend of television, won 2 Emmys out of 6 for Mary Tyler Moore, was on Too Close for Comfort. Before all that, he was constantly working anyway. Also, he's another actor. And then Cindy Morgan, Tron, Say No More. This was Ted Knight's final film, although he continued working in TV on Too Close for Comfort, as you're saying, in The Love Boat for a few more years. He died in 1986. So it's a bit of a last hurrah for him in film. Bill Murray, we've talked about him with Ghostbusters and with Rushmore. Kind of an amazing pivot that Bill Murray had in the last 20 years or whatever, going from this broad comedy background and all those huge hits to working with all these indie auteurs like Wes Anderson and Sofia Coppola and Jim Jarmusch. And it's kind of amazing how revered Bill Murray is in so many different circles, from comedy to indie film, and just like as this weird mythical figure that he's built up over the years. Yeah, he still doesn't have an agent. You have to leave a message on a hotline and maybe he'll come back and talk to you. He is in, obviously, Asteroid City, the new Wes Anderson movie. He's got 5 things going on right now. A new Ant-Man, Greatest Beer Run Ever, which was a big book. And then he's in this limited series with Dave Franco called The Now. A man decides to turn his life around after learning he is the third member of his immediate family to be suicidal. So he's one of the stars of that.
Is he the suicidal guy, or that's Dave Franco?
Maybe he's one of them. There's three of them in there, right?
Okay.
So,
yeah, that could be interesting.
Josh, because we have talked about Bill Murray before, I thought like maybe we could mention that he directed a movie once, Quick Change.
Quick Change is great. If you haven't seen it, Quick Change is very, very entertaining and I think underrated as a film. And I don't know why Bill Murray never directed again. He co-directed that movie, so maybe he was trying to kind of ease into directing, and maybe it wasn't for him.
Just wasn't. And he co-wrote The Razor's Edge, which has a bit of a cult following now, I'd say.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, but certainly a multi-talented kind of guy. So I feel like we're putting it off. We got to talk about Caddyshack 2.
We can. I just want to say Henry Wilcoxon, who played the bishop that I mentioned earlier, Murray was like fascinated with like him and these other older actors because, you know, he found out that they were like huge stars in the 20s and 30s and they had been forgotten. So that was pretty cool. Caddyshack 2. How come that movie is so good, Josh?
Sadly, Caddyshack 2, not good. A prime example of a studio determining that we must have a sequel to something that was a big hit. It was 8 years later, though. So I think that possibly goes to, Jason, what you were talking about earlier, that even as Caddyshack was a big hit, it sort of built into an even bigger hit over the course of those years and probably being aired on TV. And, as home video became bigger and bigger in the 80s. And so 1988, they determined it was time for Caddyshack 2. Harold Ramis actually is credited as a co-writer on Caddyshack 2, although it sounds like maybe they didn't use much of his material.
Yeah, I think when you're saying it's 8 years later, this was one of those that was probably developed very shortly after. And Rodney Dangerfield was attached to it and then asked for like a ton of money. And I think that like kind of veered this whole thing off course here.
Yeah, and so they replace him with Jackie Mason, not playing the exact same character, but a very similar kind of character who's a real estate developer, who's kind of this uncouth East Coast outsider who comes in and shakes up the country club. And in Caddyshack 2, he has this daughter who is kind of, I don't know, she's almost the main character. And
she's horrible.
She is quite horrible. And her whole storyline about wanting to fit in with the rich people. And it really, she acts like kind of an asshole for the entire movie.
Horrible.
And then gets redemption. And also Jonathan Silverman, who plays the Michael O'Keefe character, essentially the nice guy caddy. He's fine. Yeah. But Chevy Chase is the only one who actually did come back for Caddyshack 2 and clearly is not interested in being in Caddyshack 2. But that's kind of what makes it funny.
Josh, I was going to say, because you're like, he did come back. And I was like, but did he?
Right. Yes.
It is kind of funny just how little effort he's giving, but it's also kind of sad.
I mean, it is, but I think, you like you were saying before, the way he sort of underplays the punchlines in the original Caddyshack, that's really funny. He underplays them even more in Caddyshack 2. And yeah, it possibly is because he doesn't care and he doesn't want to be there. But for some of that stuff, especially when the material is not really that good, it's almost funnier the way he's like, yeah, fuck this, fuck everything.
Yeah.
It's kind of entertaining.
Yeah, it's a mess. It's a horrible. It's like, it has, I guess, some semblance of a plot, but it doesn't matter because everyone's so bad. So
yeah, it is quite bad. And one of the most amusing things about Caddyshack 2, which was directed by Alan Arkush, who is a very active user on Letterboxd, including often logging his own films. And if you go to Letterboxd and look up Caddyshack 2, the number one review is from director Alan Arkush, who says, "I should never have made this movie. There was only one caddy and no shack. What was I thinking?" So,
I mean, he was a hot TV director at the time, and I think he was just looking for that opportunity, right? But I think he probably signed on when it was Rodney Dangerfield, and it was a different picture. So.
Yeah, I mean, and he had come up in the Roger Corman School of Independent Film and found a lot of success directing TV and wanted to get back into films with this. But it's amusing that he's willing to be that candid about it on Letterboxd, of all places.
Josh, John Peters, we mentioned. I really think we should, as a group, have a book club and read the book Hit and Run, how John Peters and Peter Guber took Sony for a ride in Hollywood, about how, the Sony Corporation didn't know much about how movies are made. So they gave Gubers and Peters like the free reign to make movies in the 90s. And they just like, as the title implies, just bilk them for everything with little positive output there. But hey, man, A Star Is Born, Flashdance, Color Purple, Rain Man, The Witches of Eastwick, and of course, Wild Wild West. So,
Yeah, John Peters has had quite the career, being married to Pamela Anderson for a minute, dating Barbara Streisand.
It's Streisand.
Right. And being immortalized. I don't know how he actually feels about Bradley Cooper and Licorice Pizza, but it's given him this kind of mythical status in addition to what he'd already had.
Well, I'm actually in the middle of Shampoo right now, and Warren Beatty's great, but the Bradley Cooper performance is just so awesome in there. So I got to give the nod to Cooper on that one. Josh, we mentioned Doug Kenny. There was that movie on Netflix, A Futile and Stupid Gesture, which I think is based on a book, how Doug Kenny and
David Wayne directed it.
Yeah, I didn't like it. Did you like it?
It was all right. It was one of his lesser works.
And that's like a biopic about the early days of National Lampoon.
Right.
Yeah, the book was called how, the subtitle was How Doug Kenny and National Lampoon Changed Comedy Forever. He was, like Chevy Chase, a big drug user. They all were, but it's interesting when you read these books because it's like, it was the 70s, it was the 80s. Nobody knew that cocaine was bad. It must have been interesting to like really, because like we know, and
did they not? How can you not know that cocaine is bad?
I mean, that's how they felt, I guess. So, he was always this Animal House, and he had a very successful production company where there would have been a lot more going on. But he was a huge drug user. When he was in Hawaii, he slipped off of a cliff and fell to his death tragically. Harold Ramis at the funeral had the quote, "Doug was looking for a better place to jump when he slipped," which is a very dark and fair quote for that type of National Lampoon humor. So how many other great movies did we miss out on because of his early demise? We'll never know.
Yeah, that is a sad thing. So on that note, then, that is Caddyshack, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Check us out on social media.
We are on social media. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or J Harris Comedy, on all the platforms. My website, goforjason.com, needs to be blown out of the underground by sticks of dynamite, much like a dancing gopher was not. AwesomeMovieYear.com is serviceable. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter.
I am at JoshBellHatesEverything.com, at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
Jason, what do we have in our next episode?
Josh, I think this is going to be one of our most interesting episodes ever. We are doing the biggest box office flop of 1980 and one of the most notorious flops of all time, Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate.
So tune in next time for Heaven's Gate, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.